Last week, I did a video discussing how high level Democrats are trying to get James Carville to stop talking about Joe Biden's chances for re election. I guess in part because they thought that Carville didn't know what he was talking about. Well, the New York Times dropped a poll this morning that did two things simultaneously. Number one, the New York Times poll proved just how smart James Carville is. And number two, it caused a collective freakout inside the Democratic Party. Just how bad is this poll? Hang on, folks, because you're going to get a kick out of all this.
My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk.
The New York Times dropped a poll this morning that is causing a collective freakout inside the Democratic Party. It's so bad, everybody is hitting the panic button on the political left. And it just goes to show that some people, James Carville, is a whole lot smarter than some give him credit for being, which means, not that I normally give advice to Democrats, but I will in this case, when someone the caliber of a James Carville tells you that your president is in trouble, you probably ought to listen to him. But anyway, I'm not here to shill for James Carville or anybody else. I am here to do a little bit of analysis about this news article and the polling inside of it. So let's go to the New York Times and we'll take a look at the following. Headline: Trump leads in 5 critical states as voters blast Biden, Times Siena poll finds. Voters in battleground states said they trusted Donald J. Trump over President Biden on the economy, foreign policy, and immigration, as Mr. Biden's multiracial base shows signs of fraying. Article written by Shane Goldmacher. President Biden is trailing Donald J. Trump in 5 of the 6 most important battleground states 1 year before the 2024 election, suffering from enormous doubts about his age and deep dissatisfaction over his handling of the economy and a host of other issues, new polls by the New York Times and Siena College have found. The results show Mr. Biden losing to Mr. Trump, his likeliest Republican rival, by margins of 4 to 10 percentage points among registered voters in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. Mr. Biden is ahead only in Wisconsin by 2 percentage points, the poll found. Across the 6 battleground states, all of which Mr. Biden carried in 2020, the president trails by an average of 48 to 44%. Discontent pulsates throughout the Times Siena poll, with a majority of voters saying Mr. Biden's policies have personally hurt them. The survey also reveals the extent to which the multiracial and multigenerational coalition that elected Mr. Biden is fraying. Demographic groups that backed Mr. Biden by landslide margins in 2020 are now far more closely contested, as 2/3 of the electorate see the country moving in the wrong direction. Voters under 30 favor Mr. Biden only by a single percentage point. That is amazing. His lead among Hispanic voters is down to single digits, and the advantage in urban areas is half of Mr. Trump's edge in rural areas. And while women still favor Mr. Biden, men preferred Mr. Trump by twice as large a margin, reversing the gender advantage that had fueled so many Democratic gains in recent years. Black voters, long a bulwark for Democrats and for Mr. Biden, are now registering 22% support in these states for Mr. Trump. That is enormous. Ladies and gentlemen, if that holds up between now and Election Day, Biden is cooked. But we read further. Add it all together, and Mr. Trump leads by 10 points in Nevada, 6 in Georgia, 5 in Arizona, 5 in Michigan, and 4 in Pennsylvania. Mr. Biden holds a 2-point edge in Wisconsin. Okay, let's talk about all this. I think a few things ought to be said about this poll at the start. Number one, this is a poll of registered voters. Now, if you know anything about how this works, there's a difference between polling registered voters and polling likely voters. General rule of thumb is registered voters kind of gives a little bit of, quote, advantage to Democrats. But when it gets down to a likely voter poll, you're going to find out real fast which way things are really moving. Because if you are likely to vote, that is who's going to show up on election day. Registered voters are nice, but they don't really mean anything. It's the likely voter screen you got to pay most attention to. But I will say this. If Biden is losing in these battleground states among registered voters right now, if this trend holds up all the way to election day, when we get to start seeing polls with likely voter screens in them, these numbers could be significantly worse for Joe Biden. That's the first point. Number two, keep in mind, this poll is for a two-man race. This is not going to be a two-man race depending on which state you're talking about. The poll is not taking into account Robert Kennedy Jr., it's not taking into account Cornel West, and it's not taking into account a no-labels candidate if one decides to get in. You could conceivably have 5 different individuals of significance as far as their vote share on a ballot in a particular state. That is going to change the dynamics all the way around. And depending on which state you're talking about and which set of candidates are on the ballot will determine who gets hurt the most, Trump or Biden. But the results of these polls are pretty interesting. And it does show that Biden has enormous problems regardless of who's on the ballot against him. We've been saying for the longest time here on the Electronic Front Porch that Biden's coalition is coming apart. African Americans, generationally speaking, are starting to drift away from the Democratic Party. Now, there's a certain inner demographic. If it's African Americans above a certain age, particularly African American women, they're going to be loyal to the Democratic Party no matter what. But African American men below a certain age, their votes are up for grabs. And I think the fact that Donald Trump is pulling 22 points among African Americans gives you an idea of where that's coming from. Also, there's a strong shift in Hispanic vote and non-college educated vote toward Donald Trump. Put it all together, Biden has got enormous problems. As a matter of fact, just to give you an idea what the numbers look like, let me put this up real fast for you. Take a look at all this. 10 points in Nevada, 6 points in Georgia, 5 points in Arizona, Michigan, 5-point lead for Trump, Pennsylvania, 4-point lead for Trump. The only state where Joe Biden has a lead is Wisconsin. And we're going to get to something about that in just a moment. So for a little bit of analysis about what all this polling means, I take you to the Twitter page for the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. Talking about Wisconsin, keep this in mind. Got news for everyone, says Rich Barris. Wisconsin is probably the most difficult of these states to poll at the presidential level. If Trump is ahead of Biden in all the other swing states, especially by these margins, he's taking the Badger State too. Clean sweep as of today. And there is one last point about this New York Times poll that I want to point out to everybody. Everybody is looking at these numbers, particularly Democrats, and they're collectively freaking out. But it could be even worse than what the numbers are showing. Let me point out one other tweet by Rich Barris. Take a look at this. The New York Times poll was not the most accurate poll in 2020. Biden led Trump in all of those states, and the New York Times even said Biden was leading in Iowa, Ohio, and Florida. Well, there's one thing about Iowa, Ohio, and Florida, ladies and gentlemen. Trump won all those states. But look at these margins that the New York Times said that Biden was leading by. Michigan, +8. Wasn't even close. He won it by +2. Nevada, Biden +6. Biden barely won Nevada. Same thing with Arizona. Same thing with Wisconsin. Same thing with Georgia. Barely won Pennsylvania. My point is this. The numbers that we're looking at right now say that Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden in 5 of the 6 battleground states. But if Barris is right, and frankly history proves him to be so in this matter, keep in mind, the New York Times poll wasn't even close to being accurate in 2020. It overestimated Democrat support and underestimated what Donald Trump would get on Election Day. And the proof of that were the final numbers. If Biden is losing to Trump with 1 year out by these numbers already, it could be significantly worse than what any of us even begin to realize. But as if things weren't bad enough for Democrats around the country and they don't have enough to cry in their milk about, there was one other poll that dropped today from CBS News. Folks, take a look at this headline. If Trump wins, more voters foresee better finances and staying out of war, CBS News poll finds. Article written by Anthony Salvanto, Jennifer DePinto, and Fred Bacchus. With views of things in America continuing to be bad and now hitting their most negative marks of the year, one might expect an incumbent president to trail in a pre-election poll, as Joe Biden does in this one. But that's only half the story. The other half is that Donald Trump holds distinct advantages in his own right when voters look forward. More voters think they'd be better off financially if Trump wins in 2024, and more voters think it's Trump who can keep the U.S. out of war if he wins. Biden's Democrat base looks a little more shaky than does Trump's going into next year, too, which isn't helping him. On those financial measures, Mr. Biden hasn't fully made the case to his fellow Democrats that he'll help them financially or address inequality, certainly not in the way Trump has convinced Republicans. Looking overseas, Democrats aren't as sure about Mr. Biden avoiding an overseas war as Republicans are about Trump doing so. And then more directly, Democrats are just less apt to say they'll vote. Granted, it's far off, but it does speak to the challenges Mr. Biden has in front of him 1 year out from Election Day. Now, what was the upshot of all this? Well, we go deep into this article and we find that according to the CBS News poll, Donald Trump's got a 3-point lead on Joe Biden nationwide. Now, the margin of error is 3.3 on this poll, but my point is this: they're dead even. And we are 1 year out. Now, as the old saying goes, it's an eternity in American politics. 1 year is anything could happen. But if these trend lines hold up, Donald Trump is going to beat Joe Biden, absent some form of, how shall I put it, election fornication, I think is Robert Barnes' term for it. Absent the Democrats' ability to somehow manipulate the vote to keep Joe Biden in, Donald Trump's going to clean his clock. Now, am I going to go out on a limb and absolutely guarantee it? Nope, because the last time I thought that was going to happen, Joe Biden actually won. But the trends are there on the economy, on immigration, on foreign policy, on everything else. Everybody is looking at these two men and saying to themselves, Donald Trump did a better job than did Joe Biden. If this race were tomorrow, I'd probably go lay down some money on Trump. But then again, this race is not tomorrow. Anything could happen. But if the trend doesn't get any better for Joe Biden, he's going to be a one-term president. But that's what I think about it. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number 1, if you're not a subscriber to this channel, please do so. Number 2, please leave a comment below. Number 3, please share the video around. I'll take all the help I can get. Number 4, hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when new material is coming out. And finally, give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.